Jeremy Thorpe's story is one of the most extraordinary rises and collapses in modern British politics. A man of immense charm, wit, and ambition, he seemed destined to reshape the political landscape. Instead, he became the centre of a scandal, so sensational that it overshadowed everything he had ever achieved. He was a politician who once dreamed of becoming Prime Minister, and yet he ended up standing in the dock of the Old Bailey. He was born in 1929 into a family steeped in political tradition. From an early age, Thorpe grew up surrounded by the rituals and expectations of public life. At Eton, and later at Oxford, he developed the traits that would define him: quick-witted, theatrical, and utterly confident in his own destiny. By the early 1960s, he had become one of the brightest stars of the Liberal Party. Young, modern, and media-friendly, he brought an energy the party had been missing for decades. When he became leader in 1967, many believed he could revive a political force that had been fading for generations. And for a time, he did. But behind the public charm was a private life that carried enormous risk. Homosexuality had only recently been partially decriminalized, and social attitudes remained deeply hostile. For a public figure, exposure could mean ruin. It was in this climate that Thorpe met Norman Scott, a vulnerable and troubled young man whose life would become entangled with Thorpe's in ways neither could escape. Scott claimed that he and Thorpe had a relationship in the early 1960s. Thorpe always denied it, but what is clear is that Scott repeatedly sought help from him, especially over missing national insurance documents that left him unable to work. Their correspondence, their meetings, and their arguments would later become the foundation of a scandal that shook the country. For years, Thorpe managed to keep Scott's allegations out of the public eye. But by the mid-1970s, the situation had spiraled. Scott was speaking openly, letters existed, rumours were circulating in Westminster, and then came the event that turned a private problem into a national sensation. In 1975, Norman Scott was travelling across Exmoor with his dog, Rinker, when a man named Andrew Newton attempted to shoot him. The gun jammed. Rinker was killed. Scott survived. Newton later claimed he had been hired to kill Scott, and that the plot led back to Jeremy Thorpe. The press erupted. The Liberal Party panicked. Thorpe's career, once so promising, began to unravel. In 1979, he and 3 co-defendants were charged with conspiracy to murder. The trial at the Old Bailey became one of the most watched legal spectacles in British history. The prosecution painted a picture of a desperate politician trying to silence a man who threatened his career. The defense argued that Scott was unreliable, unstable, and motivated by attention. Thorpe himself did not take the stand. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. Legally, Thorpe was acquitted. Politically, he was finished. The Liberal Party distanced itself, his public life collapsed, and the man who once seemed destined for the highest office faded into obscurity. Jeremy Thorpe's legacy remains deeply contested. Supporters remember him as a brilliant orator, a modernizer, and a man who brought life back to the Liberal Party. Critics see a politician whose ambition and secrecy led to one of the most bizarre scandals in British political history. Norman Scott, meanwhile, lived for decades in the shadow of the events on Exmoor. His story, often dismissed, mocked, or doubted, has gradually been re-examined with greater empathy. Thorpe died in 2014, still denying Scott's claims. His story raises uncomfortable questions about power, secrecy, sexuality, and the pressures placed on public figures in a society far less tolerant than today. It is a reminder that history is rarely neat, and that the truth, whatever it may be, often lies tangled between personal pain and public ambition. Jeremy Thorpe remains one of the most controversial figures in British political life. His rise was remarkable. His fall was catastrophic. and his story continues to echo through the corridors of Westminster. A cautionary tale of ambition, secrecy, and the price of power.
When Jeremy Thorpe strode onto the political stage, many thought he'd be the greatest Liberal leader in 50 years. A dazzling showman, witty and energetic, he effortlessly balanced royal friendships with radical principles. A decade later, he stood charged with conspiracy to murder his former homosexual lover, and his public life lay in ruins. With secret tapes, exclusive confessions and film withheld for nearly 20 years, we unravel, for the first time on British television, the secret life of Jeremy Thorpe.
It was a tragedy of really Shakespearean proportions. It was a tragedy for a potentially major public figure that all this happened. It was a secondary tragedy for the party that it happened, because it knocked us back, I guess, pretty nearly a decade. As for society as a whole, well, would this whole spider's web ever have been woven if society hadn't been so hypocritical about relatively trivial homosexual relationships?
Jeremy Thorpe was born into the establishment. He went to Eton, and his father was a Tory MP. But it was the minority Liberal Party that appealed to the young Thorpe by the time he went to Oxford to study law.
Jeremy Thorpe created an impression of overwhelming ambition. But on the other hand, he clearly was somebody who had basic political principles, because someone determined to make a great mark on British political life would not have selected the Liberal Party. He was regarded as a great political fiddler. There was one famous occasion in the Oxford Union. Jeremy Thorpe, I should say, was supposed to be a very good violinist. And he had been involved in some accusation of fiddling. And somebody asked a question in the Oxford Union. Is it true that Mr. Thorpe is the best fiddler in the house? Well, his rivals for the presidency were both from Balliol. And Thorpe came back quick as a flash and says, "I will continue to fiddle till Balliol burns." There was a curious feeling at one or two expressed that somehow or other he might come a cropper.
In 1952, straight out of Oxford, Thorpe was adopted as Liberal parliamentary candidate for North Devon. When ITV was launched, he was hired as a presenter. With his flair for publicity, people called him Britain's John F. Kennedy.
At electioneering, he was brilliant. A man full of vitality, full of energy, slightly full of his own importance, like a busy bee fluffing up and down, you know. He was brilliant at meeting people. He could go up to somebody and convince them that he knew absolutely who this dear old lady was, where she came from, where he'd met her, and everything about her, and he hadn't a clue. But he would persuade her that he knew. You know, "Hello, dear, how are you?" "Yes, I remember we met," and all this, you see. He was very friendly and very persuasive, tremendously persuasive.
Well, Mr. Dunning, how many arrests have you made today?
I'd like to arrest you, sir.
Well, I bet you would, you old scoundrel, my word.
He was a very charismatic figure, a showman, very much a political showman. First of all, he was younger than the other party leaders by quite a margin, and therefore he was a very refreshing figure on the political scene.
I say, shop!
Well, it's Mr. Governor, how are you?
Very well indeed, good morning.
Good morning.
And in case any of our viewers haven't recognised who the new assistant is, it's Jeremy Thorpe, Liberal MP for North Devon. What on earth are you doing in here, Mr. Thorpe?
Well, the Farrells who own this shop are old friends of mine. And I've always been interested in post office matters, and I heard from them this spring that they hadn't had a holiday together for 18 years, so I offered to come and stand in for them, which means they're able to get away. And I also thought it'd be an extremely valuable experience.
A lot of people are going to say, and indeed are saying, that this is a political gimmick. You're doing this, indeed, for publicity.
Well, it certainly didn't start that way. I'm afraid if you're a politician, whatever you do, somebody will attribute some sinister motive to it. It's nothing new.
You could almost call it a Jekyll and Hyde character. He used to say, you know, that you won't succeed in politics unless you're prepared to go for the jugular. And I think that was part of his nature. He was prepared to go for the jugular.
There was a night when Macmillan, as Prime Minister, sacked half his cabinet. And Jeremy's comment from the opposition benches, which was then to become a classic, was, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his friends for his life."
These words would come to haunt Thorpe when, many years later, his secret life unravelled, and he would really need his friends. In 1960, the encounter that would lead to the trial of the century took place here at Kingham in Oxfordshire. John Ryan was a witness.
Jeremy Thorpe met Norman Scott at Squirrel Cottage, and I think that's where the affair started. Very gentle bloke.
Obviously gay?
Oh, yeah, yes, Norman was gay, all right, yeah.
The young Norman Scott was a groom at the stables, and Thorpe was a frequent visitor.
He came out into the stable yard and said, you know, he was talking to me about the horses and various things which he wasn't really interested in. And he said, would I like to, if anything should happen, it was a rather sort of strange thing to say, but if anything should ever happen, I should get in touch with him.
When Scott left his job, he went to see Thorpe at Westminster. Later that day, the acquaintance became a sexual relationship.
He said, you mustn't be frightened, I will look after you and care for you. And I broke down, and that's when he got into bed and seduced me. For the first year, there was a very, very good, perhaps one shouldn't say it, but it was a beautiful relationship, really. I was, well, on my part, I was very proud of the fact that I was with him, no matter how bad that might sound.
Thorpe denies that he ever had an affair with Scott, but his letters testify to a close relationship.
My dear Norman, since my letters normally go to the house, yours arrived all by itself at my breakfast table at the Reform and gave me tremendous pleasure. I cannot tell you just how happy I am to feel that you're really settling down. Bunnies can and will go to France. In haste, yours affectionately, Jeremy. I miss you.
The Bunny's letter would become a permanent record of an affair from which Thorpe would soon want to escape.
We lived in this flat at one stage in London. He just had a sort of single bed. And he used to just say, well, there's, after the sort of physical thing, he'd say, there's a camp bed in the wardrobe, get it out and sleep on it. It's just such a lonely experience, really.
Thorpe had chosen an unstable lover with a history of mental illness. One outburst in which he said he wanted to kill Thorpe brought Scott to the attention of the Chelsea police, where he gave a statement about their affair. Homosexuality was then still illegal, and Thorpe was faced with a possible criminal charge.
Thorpe wasn't interviewed because we knew in our own mind that there would be a denial, and without evidence that we could in fact put to him, which would be overwhelming, it was a waste of time seeing Thorpe. And so the papers were submitted through my superiors at that time, and subsequently to the yard, and then dealt with in the normal course of events at the yard, and I didn't hear any more of that particular inquiry.
The police had decided not to pursue Thorpe, but their report was added to a growing number of files, including an MI5 investigation detailing their concern about Thorpe's homosexual tendencies. Meanwhile, with their sexual relationship cooling, Norman Scott was becoming disgruntled. He started badgering Thorpe to sort out his national insurance card, which Thorpe held and without which Scott couldn't get a job.
And I kept on writing or ringing him and saying, please, please send me the insurance card. I thought, well, the only thing to do is to, if he won't do the insurance card for me, I must ask his mother if she'll intercede as the person nearest to him. And people would say, well, that was deliberate and spiteful, but it wasn't. It was my desperation.
The stakes had been raised. Thorpe considered Scott's letter blackmail.
For the last 5 years, as you probably know, Jeremy and I have had a homosexual relationship. Through my meeting with Jeremy, I gave birth to this vice that lies latent in every man.
There can hardly have been a morning when Thorpe did not wake up and think, if only I hadn't met him, if only, if only. And what is so extraordinary is that such an intelligent, worldly man got into such a trap. Both Norman Scott and Jeremy Thorpe seemed to ride in harness towards the precipice, hell-bent on the destruction of each other.
Only one man stood between Thorpe and ruin, his friend Liberal MP Peter Bessel. Bessel and his family were witness to Thorpe's double life.
For my father, Jeremy's indiscretions were an irritation. There was one occasion, for example, where Jeremy came down to Cornwall for, I believe it was a garden party or a fete, and brought somebody with him who I believe he introduced as a journalist or whatever, and it was clear to my mother that this was a boyfriend rather than a journalist.
That no settlement should be reached.
Thorpe asked Bessel to deal with the growing problem of Norman Scott.
My father's job was to ensure, as far as Scott was concerned, that A, this did not reach the papers, because whether Jeremy was a homosexual or not, it didn't alter the fact that this man was making allegations. By keeping him looked after, the theory was he wouldn't make public his accusations. Dad felt that as long as he was around, he could keep the situation safe.
Bessel protected Thorpe for the next 10 years. It was a remarkable cover-up. With the relationship over, Bessel tried to find Scott a job abroad and get him out of harm's way. He took the unusual step of writing to a cabinet minister in an attempt to resolve Scott's insurance card problems. He even went to see the Home Secretary to reassure Thorpe that the police weren't still onto him. Crucially, though, he actually tried to buy Scott's silence with a series of payments, funded by Jeremy Thorpe.
I'm enclosing your retainer for the week ending the 23rd of August. I'm enclosing £7 to help you with Mr. Bessel has asked me to send you the enclosed £5. Yours sincerely.
Jeremy Thorpe may be the man to attract the voters. In the last election, it took 194,000...
The cover-up was working and Thorpe's career prospered. In 1967, his talent for campaigning won him the Liberal leadership. He was still only 38. Soon afterwards, he decided it was time to get married.
As everybody knows, holding high political office can be a very lonely business. The new bride will most certainly help Mr. Thorpe overcome that problem.
His homosexual life appears to have ended there. By all accounts, Thorpe adored his wife, Caroline.
You've been for a long time one of the most confirmed bachelors in the House of Commons. You know, is it a very recent decision of yours to get married?
Well, I don't know whether I've been confirmed or whether it merely hasn't been there's been enough time to look around.
But you're, a staunch Liberal now?
Give me time, I could be talked into it.
But marriage didn't bring peace. Only 2 years later, after the birth of their son Rupert, Caroline was killed in a car crash.
The police inspector came in and asked if he could speak to him, and because we were there, he didn't want to break the news to him in front of us, and asked him to come outside, told him what appeared to have happened, because at that stage there was no definite identification. And he came back into the room very shocked, of course, and sat down and told us what he'd just been told, and said to us both, "You'll have to help me."
For a year, he was consumed by grief. But as soon as he'd recovered, yet another blow. In 1971, the explosive secret of Norman Scott was revealed to the Liberal Party. Scott was now living in Wales and had begun spreading his story far and wide. A new friend felt Scott had been badly treated by Thorpe and wrote to a Liberal MP. The party began a secret inquiry, to which Scott submitted his payoff letters.
My initial response to the story was one of some shock, because not what Norman Scott was himself alleging, but the file of papers that he had and all the letters from Peter Bessel with sums of money. I mean, that was the worrying aspect.
They said, would I please come to the House of Lords and see Lord Byres? So I told him the whole story, and he said, Mr. Scott, I would put it to you that you're nothing but a common blackmailer.
Frank Byres, who was our leader in the Lords, was rather abrupt with him, to put it mildly, and he left in a flood of tears. And that was the end of the inquiry. It didn't really get very far.
Another inquiry had left Thorpe unscathed and Norman Scott dissatisfied. He was not going to go away.
I think that I posed a threat because of my honesty. People were beginning to believe me, not him.
By 1973, Thorpe had rebuilt his personal life. He'd remarried to Marion Harwood, a concert pianist recently divorced from the Queen's cousin. He was also on the brink of his greatest political triumph. February 1974 saw the highest Liberal vote in half a century. Prime Minister Edward Heath, facing defeat, invited Thorpe to urgent talks.
It came as a bolt from the blue when he suddenly disappeared into number 10, without, as far as I know, consulting anybody else in the party.
What inducements did Mr. Heath offer you to join him in a coalition?
Well, I don't think it's a question of inducements. I think the main question was whether the principle commended itself or not. Obviously, a coalition would involve a seat in the cabinet. And
he got close to power in the sense that if he'd said yes, he would have been in. I think, in a personal sense, he would have liked to have said yes. But his problem was the party were not prepared to allow him to say yes. I mean, I had telephone calls all weekend saying we haven't voted Liberal to put Ted Heath back in power.
Without party backing, there could be no deal with the Tories. But Thorpe's Liberals were on the march.
With 600 candidates and a solid base of 6 million votes on which to build, we seek a majority in our own right.
A second general election beckoned within the year. The Liberals were poised for the breakthrough. With Thorpe so close to power, his affair with the ever-talkative Norman Scott was a bigger danger than ever.
There would be an enormous amount of panic because in 1974, in the second election in 1974, we really were expecting to make the breakthrough. The pressures on Jeremy to continue to campaign vigorously were enormous, and he had to be allowed to be able to do that without interruption and without worry, and without the obviously political threat of what Norman Scott might or might not be going to talk about.
The danger edged closer when his ally Peter Bessel, who'd kept Scott under control for years, could no longer hold the fort.
My father left England in January 1974 because of the collapse of his companies and in financial ruin to all intents and purposes. Really, it was from that point onwards that the situation started to go downhill for Jeremy.
Needing someone else to protect him from Scott, Thorpe turned to his friend at Oxford, the best man at his first wedding, banker David Holmes, who he'd brought in as the Liberals' deputy treasurer. Holmes would later stand trial alongside Thorpe. His words can be heard now for the first time, speaking before he died, about Thorpe and the Scott problem.
Scott was still going on, muttering about it and talking to everyone. And this was literally talking to everyone. I mean, he sat in different pubs and talked to everybody who would listen. Small wonder that Jeremy felt trapped by Scott.
Down in Devon, one of the people Scott had talked to offered Holmes a bundle of Scott's letters. To protect Thorpe, Holmes paid out £2,500 for the letters, which he took back and burnt. It was, he said, the most expensive bonfire in history. It was also the biggest payoff Scott ever received. But paying Scott was not going to solve Thorpe's problem.
In the end, Jeremy was as obsessed by Scott as Scott was by Jeremy. He was going to go on being dangerous. It gave Jeremy the sense of permanent persecution, that I will never be safe while that man is around.
Thorpe's fears set off a bizarre chain reaction. Holmes travelled to South Wales to see a business associate, carpet dealer John Le Mesurier. Le Mesurier has never before spoken about the Thorpe affair.
David felt that, this man Scott has no end to him. He's just a lunatic. And to get rid of him would be getting rid, well, to stop him doing it would be like getting rid of a mad dog. David asked me if I knew anyone who would do it, and I said, well, frankly, no, but I know someone that might.
Through an intermediary, they hired Andrew Newton, maverick pilot with a reputation as an adventurer. Newton has not spoken of his assignment since he gave evidence at Thorpe's trial, until now.
David Holmes expressly asked that Norman Scott should be killed.
You're telling me the absolute truth that David hadn't asked you to kill Norman Scott?
I mean, I don't want to have to repeat it again, but yes, absolutely.
October 1975. Scott was tracked down to Barnstaple in North Devon. Two unidentified men beat him up outside a pub in town. Then someone posing as a journalist stole documents which proved Scott had been paid off. The net was closing in. Newton met Scott at a hotel, saying he was there to protect him. He suggested they drive over that evening to Porlock, which would take them by way of a lonely road over Exmoor.
Norman Scott breezes up with this bloody great enormous hound, a Great Dane. This presented a problem. The dog got in the car, looming in the back, breathing down my neck. It was dark. I feigned tiredness. Norman Scott said, I'll drive if you wish. You can stay round my place. I pulled the car up and I used the opportunity to get Norman Scott out of the car, hopefully separating him from the dog.
I got out of the car, came round, and he was already out. And Rinker was very pleased to be out, that's the dog. And I said, come on, Rinker, and tried to get it to come in.
I pulled the automatic out, and I did something that I really do regret, very much so. I shot the dog.
I was bending down, and he said, "It's your turn now," and I was still sort of looking at her, not really understanding. He was shaking this object, I don't know, he couldn't really see what it was. He was going, "Oh, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it," and shaking it, really sort of shaking it, and looking down at it. And then he levelled it at me, and I suddenly realised he was going to shoot me as well.
I was off duty and I was driving along the moor one evening. A man jumped out in the road, held his hands up. We had to stop and run over him. Scott told me a man had tried to shoot him. He shot his dog. The dog was laying on the road, and the man got very irate, very angry, because the gun had jammed. And so he jumped in his car and turned around, went back towards Porlock.
Scott told the police he'd been targeted because of his affair with Jeremy Thorpe, but the police weren't inclined to believe him. And for months, nothing came to light suggesting the Liberal leader would be linked with the crime. Ultimately, it wasn't the shooting which began to implicate Thorpe, but the money which paid for the conspiracy. It had been siphoned off from funds raised for the Liberal Party. The original but innocent source of the money was Jack Hayward, a millionaire Tory based in the Bahamas who'd become a generous, if unlikely, benefactor to the Liberals.
I wasn't a Liberal, but it's a bad expression in view of what happened, but I always supported the underdog.
Come on, come on, come on.
Jeremy, of course, prevailed upon me that Conservatives were funded by big business, the Labour by trade unionists, and the poor old Liberals only had little old ladies in Budleigh Salterton and Cheltenham Spa.
A year before the shooting, Thorpe wrote asking Hayward for another donation. He said it was for election expenses.
Didn't want any questions asked, and it sounded perfectly innocent. And would I send, I think it was 10,000 to a man called Nadir Dinshaw.
Thorpe asked Hayward to bypass the usual route for party donations.
Nadir Dinshaw, conveniently resident in Jersey, has agreed to settle bills. Accordingly, it would be immensely helpful if you could send me 2 cheques. I can then clear everything up safely.
Dinshaw, another friend of Thorpe, also thought the money was for election purposes.
Jeremy rang me up and said Jack Hayward wanted to give some money for party, not for party, for election expenses. And, you know, he didn't want to give it officially to the party. He wanted Jeremy to have the control of it, something like that. And would I take it and then pass it on to David Holmes? And I was a bit sort of unwilling, but I thought, well, he's a friend. He's such a great friend. I try never to say no to my friends.
Here was a direct link into the affairs of the party. It was no longer a personal matter, if in fact it was true that money that had been, or part of some money that had been given for election purposes, had been used for other purposes, to buy off or scare off or otherwise get rid of Norman Scott.
In the early months of 1976, the press started breaking the story. The news that David Holmes purchased Scott's letters came as a terrible blow to the Liberal Party.
Newspaper story after newspaper story continued to come out, damaging Jeremy and damaging therefore the whole party. People couldn't go out on the doorsteps and ask to vote Liberal. I mean, we were, at the lowest level, we were a laughingstock, and therefore it could not continue.
I asked him if he was going to resign or not, and he said no, he'd no need to resign. He said, I've got the Prime Minister and MI5 behind me, there's nobody can touch me.
Remarkably, it was Harold Wilson, a personal friend, who stepped in to offer Thorpe an unexpected lifeline. Thorpe had always been a staunch campaigner on racial issues, in particular South Africa.
Are we to allow it to be said that we appeared to reverse our belief in a non-racial society?
All over the world, he'd spoken out courageously against apartheid.
That you select people on the grounds of their race first, and thereafter you exclude all the others. That is what bringing politics into sport has meant in South Africa.
Thorpe was a threat to South African interests. Boss, their intelligence bureau, had put an agent on his tail, Gordon Winter, working undercover as a Fleet Street reporter. In 1971, he stumbled on the allegations of a homosexual affair and interviewed Norman Scott. His orders were to leak the story at a time most likely to damage Thorpe. When he heard of the South African plot to smear him, Thorpe went straight to Downing Street. On March the 9th, 1976, Harold Wilson stunned the House of Commons, announcing, "There is strong South African participation in recent activities relating to the leader of the Liberal Party."
Harold spent an enormous amount of time plotting to save Jeremy. I remember that Harold saying to me once, if we don't protect Jeremy, and they get away with it in his case, no member of the government will be safe.
It looked as if the Thorpe scandal might be dismissed as the result of a South African smear campaign, but Wilson's intervention was the last good turn Jeremy Thorpe would receive. Only a few days later, Scott's would-be assassin, Andrew Newton, was convicted and jailed. The trial allowed the press, more fully than ever before, to report Norman Scott's astounding claim of being seduced by Thorpe and paid to keep quiet.
Norman tripped over the square and said to me, "Well, I think I've upset some people." And I said, "I think you actually can say that. And at least, whatever you are, you'll have some sort of footnote as having gone down in destroying a great political party."
The pressure was becoming intolerable. Every day brought a fresh allegation. But the final straw was the publication of the Bunny's letter he'd written to Norman Scott so many years before. In May 1976, Jeremy Thorpe resigned the Liberal leadership. Another year would pass before the start of the final act. This time, the man who brought the conspiracy back to haunt Thorpe was not Scott. It was the gunman, Andrew Newton. In April 1977, Newton was released and went to South Wales to collect £5,000, the first instalment of his payoff. He decided to cash in further by selling his side of the Thorpe story. He tape-recorded conversations with his paymasters. First, John Le Mesurier.
I know how it was done, how the whole thing was set up, and so do you. Basically, it's just, 5 people know.
Then David Holmes.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, that there's always a charge, they can put onto you as possibly a conspiracy to bloody...
I'm remembering that.
To murder, right? So, let's keep it quiet.
That's fine, and you may rely on that.
Okay. Bye.
Once again, it was the press that led the hunt for Jeremy Thorpe.
I saw Newton, and he made a very frank confession or admission that he'd been hired by people connected with the Liberal Party as part of a conspiracy to, not to harm, but to kill Norman Scott.
George Cutner, who was then a leading journalist in the Evening News, asked to come and see me, and he came and laid before me evidence that he had. And I spoke to the Avon and Somerset police that they should reopen their original investigations. The evidence was such that there was a realistic prospect of a conviction.
On August the 2nd, 1978, Jeremy Thorpe was charged with incitement and conspiracy to murder. Also accused were David Holmes and the 2 South Wales businessmen alleged to have hired the gunman, carpet dealer John Le Mesurier and club owner George Deakin. But Jeremy Thorpe wasn't prepared to let justice simply take its course. He'd been busy on the telephone.
Jeremy rang up still in quite sort of panic and said to me, you don't need to say anything to the police. And I said, Jeremy, I do. I have got to speak the truth. You know that. And he said, well, it'll be curtains for me, and you may well be asked to move on. And I said, move on? And I said, I don't really, I think I probably said I don't really understand. I was so taken aback.
What did it mean?
Well, it meant that I'd be deported, or could be deported, but I couldn't. I mean, it was so stupid. That's really what I felt.
It was a threat?
Yeah, but such a stupid threat. Even I know that after you've lived in this country for 25 years, you can't be deported for telling the police the truth. But I felt intensely sad. I go through that feeling of sadness every time I think of it. Because in a way, basically, because it was such a revelation to me that he had something to hide, obviously, or he wouldn't have been so apprehensive.
Jeremy was ruthless. He could be very, very cutting. He could dispose of people very, very quickly if they fell out of favour with him.
Steele had a warning for another prosecution witness, Jack Hayward, who'd also been lent on by Thorpe.
David said he had no idea of a lot of my donations, but he did impress upon me to save myself. He said, forget old loyalties, save yourself. You're very like someone in a shipwreck all swimming to the raft, and Jeremy might easily tread on your shoulders in order to get on the raft himself.
Despite Thorpe's pleas for support, his friends deserted him one by one and became prosecution witnesses. Remarkably, the trial was postponed to allow Thorpe to stand in the 1979 general election, but his campaign was shunned by his Liberal colleagues, and North Devon's voters gave their verdict.
Anthony Speller, 31,811. John Jeremy Thorpe, 23,338.
Five days later, flanked by his mother and his wife Marion, Thorpe's fall from grace finally brought him to the Old Bailey. In August 1979, a few days after Margaret Thatcher came to power, Jeremy Thorpe faced an Old Bailey jury on a charge of conspiracy and incitement to murder. The case attracted an extraordinary level of press attention. In its own way, the Thorpe affair was Britain's Watergate.
Mr. Holmes, can we have one this way, please?
I think it was one of the most peculiar and most interesting and unusual trials, because you don't often get a Privy Councillor up for conspiring to murder a former homosexual lover. Then one suddenly thought, it isn't all that funny if a senior British politician was actually going to hire thugs to bump off Norman Scott.
The key to the prosecution case was Peter Bessel, once Thorpe's protector, now his accuser, who told the court that as early as 1968, Thorpe had talked to him about Scott being killed.
It was one night, late in the House of Commons, when we were together waiting for a vote. Jeremy said to me suddenly, we have to get rid of him. I said, are you suggesting that he should be killed? And he said, that is what I'm suggesting. He said, Peter, it is no worse than shooting a sick dog.
The idea came to nothing then, but 6 years later, Bessel spoke to David Holmes, who'd taken over from him as Thorpe's right-hand man. The idea of killing Scott had resurfaced.
I said, there is something here that you are hiding. And I said, you have got to tell me the truth. And he said, all right. He said, I hired Newton to kill Scott. And I said to him, but David, this is lunacy.
The evidence was astonishing, but Bessel's character was torn apart by the defense.
Morning, gentlemen. The problem about Bessel, from the prosecution point of view, was that he'd got so many skeletons in his cupboard, and of course they were drawn out and paraded in front of the jury. He was the lay preacher who had a fairly vigorous sexual life. He got financial problems and bankruptcy, and he'd run away to the United States. So he, on the face of it, wasn't likely to be accepted by the jury, and I think that told a lot against the prosecution.
Peter Bessel was an absolute key witness, and he'd obviously played a slightly dicey part in the whole business. He couldn't come out of the story well, however he did it, and he happened to do it in a very sort of sanctimonious way, saying, I've seen the light and I've come around, and we all just wondered why he had changed his tune and what was behind it all. And of course, Bessel had signed a contract with the Sunday Telegraph, which would increase in value if there was a prosecution.
Bessel's double your money deal was savaged by Thorpe's lawyers and completely undermined him as a witness. But even Bessel's adversary in court, one of the defense lawyers, feels this was unfair.
I found Bessel's evidence curiously impressive. I don't think that he was, in fact, affected by the money which the Telegraph had promised to pay him. And I believe that he had genuinely come there to do his best to tell the truth.
Next, the prosecution called Norman Scott, the target of the alleged plot. The defense demolished him, saying he'd been pursuing Thorpe for money all along.
The judge called him a crook. People said he was a blackmailer. I didn't think he was, except in the emotional sense, that he was a hurt figure, and he wanted to hurt back, and to denounce him as a crook is not, I don't think, very fair.
I don't think the witnesses were objectively treated. I don't think the prosecution case was fairly assessed by the judge. I think that there was too much kowtowing to Mr. Thorpe's social and political position. I think it's really for juries to assess witnesses like Scott, Newton and Bessel.
Andrew Newton was the final nail in the prosecution's coffin. His evidence was so ridiculous, he came over not as a hitman, but a chump. We can reveal that this was no surprise to the defendants. Newton had told Le Mesurier that his evidence was likely to help them get acquitted.
We got there early one morning and went to the gents' toilet, and Newton came in behind me. He said, well, leave it to me, and I'll sort things out. And consequently, that morning in the dock, he made a fool of himself. His whole evidence collapsed in a farce, which was very helpful.
I think my evidence was not as helpful to the prosecution as it could have been.
That was Newton's contribution, shall we say, the Old Bailey. He was disbelieved and everyone believed he was a chump. It wasn't in his interest to have us convicted. I mean, he was, his attitude was, well, we'd paid him, so he was loyal to us for that reason.
Newton's bungling of his evidence completed the discrediting of the prosecution. Effectively, it was the end of the case. Thorpe, Holmes, and Le Mesurier never took the stand. And their united front remained solid, at least until the last moment.
At the very end of the trial, and George Carman, QC, was defending Jeremy, suggested to the jury that Jeremy acted without our knowledge, and we'd acted independently of him. I found monstrous. And when we went down to wait the trial, to wait the verdict of the jury, I turned to him, what the bloody hell's going on? You know, to see what's going on? He said, I didn't know he was going to say it. I looked at him, I said, well, greater love hath no man than to lay down his friends for his life. Remember? And he just turned away very sheepishly.
Would you just hold it there?
To this day, Thorpe denies any connection with the conspiracy. But 2 years after the trial, David Holmes told the News of the World that there was a plot, at least to scare Norman Scott. And he claimed Thorpe knew about it.
At every stage throughout the whole of this, everything I know about Jeremy also knows about because he knew at that time. There is nothing in the whole of the story that he didn't know and go along with.
But only one person to benefit must have been Jeremy Thorpe. Scott wasn't annoying me, he certainly wasn't annoying George Deacon, and he wasn't annoying David. The only person he was causing great distress to, directly, was Jeremy Thorpe.
But the judge's summing up was decisive. He called Scott a crook, a sponger, and a parasite. Bessel, he said, was a humbug, and Newton no more than a perjurer. The jury retired to consider its verdict.
I have always maintained that I was innocent of the charges brought against me, and the verdict of the jury, after a prolonged and careful investigation by them, I regard as totally fair, just, and a complete vindication.
The jury had acquitted Thorpe and his 3 co-defendants of all charges. The local vicar held a service of thanksgiving.
God bless you. This is the day which the Lord hath made, to rejoice and be glad in it.
But after the trial, the judge came in for widespread criticism. The Thorpe case quickly became an object of ridicule.
You will have noticed that 3 of the defendants have chosen very wisely to exercise their inalienable right not to go into the witness box to answer a lot of impertinent questions. I will merely say that you are not to infer anything from this other than that they consider the evidence against them so flimsy that it was scarcely worth rising from their seats and wasting breath denying these ludicrous charges. You are now to retire, carefully to consider your verdict of not guilty.
No one can dispute that Thorpe was found not guilty. But the man whose wit and energy had taken him to the very top would never recover from his appalling public humiliation. The acquittal has not proved to be a happy ending.
Jeremy knew he would not be found guilty. But he felt that the reaction of political life and political milieu would be that it would be treated rather like a Scottish verdict of not proven, and that therefore he would be ruined.
The case actually destroyed Thorpe. It revealed details about the money arrangements and things like that, which couldn't possibly have allowed him to stay in public life. There were just too many questions to be answered.
He played no part. He never attempted to stand for Parliament again. He never sought office in the party. He's been totally supportive of his local party in his former constituency of North Devon, which has come back into our hands, I'm glad to say. He's president of the Constituency Association. And from time to time, he hosts evenings at his house here for colleagues in Parliament. But he has played no public part in the life of the party nationally since then. And I think that reticence is correct.
Even though acquitted, Jeremy Thorpe has never been allowed back into any area of public life. He remains the lost leader of British politics. How then are we to assess his character and the scandal that brought him down?
I mean, I'm not going to make a dramatic Greek tragedy of this bright young man brought down by a stable boy lark. I mean, honestly, that's not the picture. Jeremy Thorpe was, I believe, brought down by the inadequacies of his own character.
Nature or society, if you like, or whatever it is, has dealt him a pretty severe blow for what either was or was not, and in either case, whether he was right or wrong, all the allegations, I mean, whether they were right or wrong, whether they were serious or not serious. He's paid one hell of a price for it.
Thorpe's exile has been further tormented. Shortly after the trial, while only in his mid-50s, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Did you feel bitter that a political career had been ended?
I don't think bitterness has ever a factor that you should have in politics. It's always very defeating.
Do you have a faith in God?
Yes. That also helped.
Was it rocked at all then?
Not very much. Might have blown off course a bit, but not very much.